You notice this is a coin. This is a real coin of Ephesus. And the bee was advertising these bee goddesses, the numerous bees that served at the temple of Artemis. And if they became pregnant, then they had ways, even back then, of aborting the babies, and they did not bear these children. It was like offered up as a sacrifice to Artemis. Very, very sad. The bottom picture has to do with a myth. Artemis was taking a bath, the tale goes. A hunter peeked through the bushes and was watching her bathe. She looked up and saw him and was so angry that she turned him into a stag. Well, then the hunter had hunting dogs with him, and his own hunting dogs chased him until they killed him. So he was killed by his own dogs, and that is that myth. So now you know one of the myths of the city of Ephesus. Paul had a lot of sinners in his congregation. He had a lot of unconverted people. You can find this out as you start studying the same first chapter. He's talking in verse 7 about people who want to be teachers of the law, but they don't know what they're talking about. So evidently there's more than one kind of false teaching going on. It goes down to verse 10, and he starts talking about adulterers and perverts. Now, I've just told y'all about some pretty fancy forms of adultery, right, where you feel real righteous afterwards. So that was going on, and Paul was calling it adultery. He was telling them what it really was, and perversion. He talks about slave traders. Remember I told you they were one of the top slave trading cities in the ancient world, liars, perjurers. So he is turning all of these people to Christ. And he says, I was once a blasphemer and a persecutor and a violent man. I was shown mercy because I acted in ignorance and misbelief. So he's holding up his own past, saying, look, if there's hope for me, there's hope for anybody. And he explains the solution. He's turning them to Jesus Christ. Verses 14 through 16, we're talking about Jesus Christ showing mercy. So he's explaining the solution to their problems with sin. Now, in this next passage, toward the end of the first chapter, he's giving Timothy some real good advice, and he's warning him. So he says, hold on to faith and a good conscience. Can you imagine how worried you would be if you were the overseer of a young man like Timothy, unmarried, in a city like Ephesus? It's like, hold on to your morals, Don't be influenced by that stuff. Paul, I'm sure, had spent some sleepless nights worried about Timothy in a city like that. Now, he talks about two people who have shipwrecked their faith in verse 20. Hymenaeus is a word that means wedding song. Now, if you can think of a guy who would come around and say, hi, I'm wedding song, I kind of doubt it. I think that was a woman's name. Hi, I'm wedding song. No? So the other person, Alexander, there's not a whole lot of question about what he was. Now, if we look in 2 Timothy 2, 16 through 18, Hymenaeus' wedding song is mentioned again. This time she's teamed up with someone named Philetus, which is beloved. So was this a man and a woman? Was this two women? We don't know for sure, but we know that they were preaching that the resurrection had already taken place. All right, so these were false teachers. We know from the Word of God that he's naming specific false teachers that were spreading false doctrine in the city of Ephesus. And he's warning Timothy, look out for those two. First of all, he's warning him about Alexander and Hymenaeus, and then Hymenaeus teams up with Philetus. So she's evidently a pretty persistent lady here. Now, one thing I need to tell you about, in the Greek language, you need to remember that there's only one word, the word woman. They do not have a special word for wife. So a man's basically saying, this is my woman. See? So it's pretty confusing. If you look at Colossians 13:19, husbands, love your wives, it's the exact same word as 1 Timothy 2:9, I want women to dress modestly. See? So we don't know if he's talking about some unconverted wives or if he's talking about, church women themselves. I will tell you a little bit about this modesty thing. In Ephesus, they just didn't have any of it. They had public baths, where the males and the females bathed together totally with no clothes. That's bad enough. But they also had public bathrooms where there was enclosure around it, and both the males and the females relieved themselves in the same enclosure. So there was no modesty in the city of Ephesus. And so Paul is talking here about dressing modestly. So I don't know if we're talking about low-cut dresses, I don't know if it's transparent fabrics, whatever. But there's some pretty immodest dressing going on in the city of Ephesus. Another thing that we need to understand is some of the Greek philosophy that was common in Ephesus among the Gnostics. They taught that Eve was created first. Now, they said that afterwards God deceived Adam and told him he was created first. But it was really Eve. One of their major teachings. They believed that Eve received special knowledge when she ate the forbidden fruit. And of course, part of that's true. She received the knowledge of good and evil. But this was good knowledge. This was good knowledge, and that female teachers later passed on this special good knowledge that Eve had received down to men. Now, these women teachers are mediators, would mediate between the gods and mankind and pass on and empower with this knowledge. And we find out that sex was involved in this because remember the biblical term for Adam knew his wife Eve, to know. All right, to know is a very ancient phrase, and it comes from this idea of empowering through sex. So it's really, a pagan tie-in that got tied in there. So these mediators had hidden knowledge, and they were often or usually available for sexual services after class. All right, so remember those things. They're important for us to know. I'm not telling you everything about their society, obviously, just the things that you need to know to understand these first 3 chapters, the things that tie in. 1 Timothy 2, verses 1 through 2, and we've got, I urge you then, first of all, that requests, prayers, intercession, and thanksgiving be made for everyone, for kings and all those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. Remember that riot I was telling you about where Paul almost got killed and they were yelling, "Great is Artemis," for 2 hours? He was wanting some peace. He was wanting peaceful lives. All right, now I'd like to point out there that word peaceful there is important. So, take a look at that and remember it. I'm going to tie it in with some other things in a little while here. But what he wanted was some peace. He didn't want riots. There's 3 Greek words for authority. Now, I have them down there, and I have listed their Strong's numbers. I'll tell you what a Strong's number is. Greek is a very complicated language. If you have a word in the subject of the sentence, then it's spelled one way. If it's an object of a preposition, it's spelled another way. If it's masculine, it's spelled one way. If it's a female, it's spelled another way. It's very complicated language. It's how the phrase, "It's all Greek to me." That's how that got started. Because of that, they assigned Strong's numbers so that the male version of a word and the female version normally has the same Strong's number. And the variations between, as far as where it's placed in the sentence, it still has the same Strong's number. That way you can keep up with if you're still dealing with the same word. Because if the ending's different, is that a different word or is that the same word? And so that's how the translators and people who research Greek keep up with the complexities of the Greek language. So, all right, we've got 3 words for authority here. I'm not going to try and pronounce each one of them, but we see that the very first one in 1 Timothy 2:2, they're using the first one, 52:47. Hooper, Ohay, how is that? Anyway, that means those in authority. And of these 3, the thing that you need to know is that none of these 3 words for authority appear in our verse that causes the most problem. When it says to usurp authority, it's not any of these 3 Greek words for authority, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so it's none of the 3. So let's go on here. Paul is again turning his people toward God. He talked about the word peaceful there. That is the male form of the word, and it's numbered 2272. Can someone remember the 2272 for us? Someone? Okay, Rhonda's going to remember 2272. Remember that. So we get on down, and we find he wants all men to be saved and come to a knowledge of the truth. Definitely true. Now look at 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 5. There is one God and one mediator between God and men, the man Jesus Christ. Remember what I told you about mediators? Remember where they were teaching that a woman had to come between the gods and man? See, he's knocking that whole concept down here. There's one mediator, and that's Jesus Christ. You see? So we're understanding that part now, that it has to do with the Gnostic beliefs that these women were mediators, and you had to go through them to get to God. Paul starts getting specific here about what's going on, and he's mentioning that he's an apostle. He's got the authority to handle this problem that's going on. I'm telling the truth, I'm not lying, and a teacher of the true faith. And he says, I want men everywhere to lift up holy hands in prayer without anger or disputing. All right, that tells us there was some anger and disputing, doesn't it? He wouldn't say that if everything was peaceful. So we've got a situation where the men have gotten really angry, really upset, and he wants them praying instead of the way they've been. He scolded the men, now he turns to the women. And I want women, or that word could be wives. We've only got one word there. We don't have the word wife to dress modestly, with decency and propriety, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds, appropriate for women who profess to worship God. Did you catch that? If I say to you, Jeanette professes to worship God. Do you catch that? See, there's a question there as to whether they really do worship God. You see, in Paul's mind, these women who are wearing the low-cut dresses or the transparent linen or whatever it was they were wearing, he wasn't too sure they were there to worship God. You know, he wasn't too sure at all. Profess to worship God. Yeah, sure.